Good afternoon. I'm Patrick Gill, Senior Director of Tax and Financial Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. As we are meeting on a virtual platform, I would like to begin by recognizing the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today from coast to coast to coast. I want to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people, and celebrate the importance of the land that we each call home. Today, I am delighted to welcome you to Accounting for Crypto, the Future of Digital Currencies in Canada, a webinar that's part of the Canadian Chamber's Industrial Revolution 4.0 series. The pandemic has accelerated the digitization of payments and the proliferation of digital currencies on Main Street and Bay Street. The question we're facing now is whether this currency disruption has tipped into a currency revolution. Today's discussion will examine the rise of digital currencies and consider how the shift may impact consumers, businesses, investors, and governments. With cryptocurrencies losing $1 trillion in market cap last week, this is a high-stakes, volatile disruption that has yet to find a state of equilibrium. We're witnessing the application of new tech to old problems. New tech commonly moves faster than old systems, and I think a lot of people are trying to catch up. That's why the Canadian Chamber believes it's important to hold public discussions like this. To guide today's public discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Kirsten Tisdale, Managing Partner, Government and Public Sector at EY Canada. Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and welcome everybody. This couldn't be more timely, I think, in terms of a topic that's happening around, I was going to say around the water coolers, but of course we're not gathered there right now, but across the country, every day, we're hearing more and more interesting news come out around, what the future looks like. And I really commend the Chamber for putting together this amazing group of people. So when we think about the future of cryptocurrency and we think about what's happening in Canada today, there could not be a more experienced group than the ones that you've assembled here. And so what we've got with us today, we've got Timothy Lane, who's the Deputy Governor for the Bank of Canada. So he's got responsibility related to monetary policy, but he oversees as well the bank's research and analysis around financial technology, crypto assets, and digital currencies. So really thrilled, Tim, to have you here today. We've also got Shannon James, who's a senior associate with Borden Ladner Gervais. And so one of the things that obviously is being significantly impacted by cryptocurrency is tax and tax treatment. So Shannon works with clients across the country really around thinking about what the right tax treatment is and also helping them when they get into disputes or need appeals. And so we're going to be looking for ideas and advice, quite frankly, as we round out the conversation today around what is the appropriate tax treatment for digital currencies. It's a really quickly evolving space. The panel would not be complete without Shopify here, and we've got Alex Danko, who's responsible for systems and crypto at Shopify. So Shopify plays such a unique role when we think about cryptocurrency, both from a technology perspective, as well as really an enabler for e-commerce. And so he will bring a fascinating point of view, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from Alex. He's, in addition to his day job, he also writes a blog about tech and finance. So he kind of eats and sleeps cryptocurrency, I believe. We've also got Matthew Parker-Jones, who's the country head of Treasury Services for Canada and the head of North American Payment Strategy for JP Morgan. So this is the angle as we're going to be thinking about this from an investment perspective. He oversees go-to-market strategy for JP's suite of cash management and liquidity solutions for Canada. And he's also driving the payment strategy agenda. So we think about an enablement here. We think about investment. We think about what's going on from an institutional perspective. Matthew is going to be able to really lean in and give us a good point of view and some thoughts there. And finally, Greg Feller. who's the president and co-founder of Mogo. So we really wanted to also bring a sort of an entrepreneurial point of view into the room. Mogo is the leading fintech company in Canada and a strong challenger to the big five banks, and has been doing some very interesting work in the acquisition space. And so Greg is going to bring that to the fore. So what we're going to do is we're going to start. We're going to open up with each of the panelists really just giving us a short kind of point of view around what is holding up from their perspective, more broad spread adoption of digital currencies. I will say at this point, it's a little bit of a disclaimer, but this is the individual perspective of each one of these business leaders. It isn't necessarily the formal opinion of the organizations that they work with. And so please take it in that spirit. And also, so that this can be shared more broadly, we will be recording the session today so that others can view it later. So with that, I think we're going to roll into this, and I will ask Timothy if you would just kick us off and give us a little bit of your perspective around what's getting in the way of making this broad spread, and then we'll get into some of the more details in a few minutes, and then I'm going to go around the horn. All right, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and this looks like a really interesting panel, and thanks to the Chamber of Commerce for putting it together. Obviously, the topic that we're going to be talking about today covers quite a wide scope of innovations, and there's a lot of very exciting work going on to try to figure out how to apply the various new technologies to improving the quality of financial services. As we know, there are various areas where there's room for improvement, and a lot of the barriers to improvement are really essentially information problems. It's basically the fact that information doesn't always get transmitted to those who need it in the financial system, and so applying some of the new wave of technologies to some of these issues could generate quite a lot of potential. So as regulators, I think our challenge is basically that we want to encourage the good aspects of innovation, the application of technologies to resolving some of these pain points in the financial system, to providing a greater array of choice to Canadians as consumers, as investors, as business people, and also promoting more competition. And all of those things are desirable, but at the same time, of course, we have a responsibility to ensure that the overall system is safe. Related to that, of course, technologies can be used to resolve genuine problems. They can also be used to generate ways of circumventing regulations, essentially doing the same thing in a way that is regulated in a different way. And so as regulators look at this, there's a principle of, same business, same risks, same rules. And so the aim is to be technologically neutral while recognizing the fact that, different products may be doing genuinely different things, and that has to be allowed for. Now, of course, where this, a lot of the regulation is not specifically the Bank of Canada's. For example, to the extent that Bitcoin is used largely as a speculative asset currently, and that's true of many of the cryptocurrencies, it's more of an area for securities regulators to think about investor protection, market integrity, and issues like that, and clearly they have put down some markers there. Where the Bank of Canada is involved is in the payments area, and there, again, certainly there are areas where there could be room to improve on current payments technologies, and we should be encouraging that. But at the same time, we have to make sure that the new platforms are well regulated. The latest federal budget gave the Bank of Canada responsibility for regulating payments service providers that are not banks. And that means basically assuring that they have a sound business model, that they're looking after customer funds appropriately, that they're managing the various risks that they're subject to in an effective way. And so that's one aspect where we're involved, but we're also involved thinking internationally about new payments vehicles, particularly about stable coins, which unlike some of the current, the traditional, almost you could call them cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, where the volatility of the value makes them very unsuitable for routine payments. Stable coins actually do have a potential to penetrate the world of payments, and it's important to make sure that there's an adequate framework to ensure that that if they are adopted by a lot of people, then that they're going to be safe. Of course, there's also another thing which we're much involved in, which is our own specific means of payment, which is what's the role of the Bank of Canada? And for a long time, the Bank of Canada has been involved in the payment system quite centrally, because we create cash in its clunky physical form, and we also create settlement balances that are used by banks and other large financial institutions to settle transactions among themselves. And so, question is, to what extent should we be trying also to bring those products into the digital age and creating a digital form of cash? And we've been looking at that for a few years now, and we're now at a phase where we're actually thinking in more concrete terms of, well, if we were going to launch something, which we haven't decided yet, then what would it look like? What attributes would it have? And how would it connect with the rest of the financial system? So I probably talked enough, so I'll leave the rest to the next.
We could keep going on this.
Other panelists, yeah.
On this alone, no, that's a great. That's a great way to kick off, and we will want to sort of delve into a little bit more around thinking about future of digital currency, what the role of the bank is. That balance between anonymity and privacy and so on. So we'll be back to you with some of those questions. Alex, why don't you get us started as well with a few opening remarks?
Sure. Thanks to all of you and to the Chamber for having us here with this great group of guests, by the way. We are always looking for every opportunity to be the voice of our merchants and for merchants everywhere whenever there are interesting things happening. So I'm glad to be here. Anytime that you have these gatherings of people to talk about cryptocurrency, you can imagine we're in a physical room and it's post-COVID, even though we're not. Something pretty usual happens, which is you have all of the banking people, and you have the government people and the regulatory people and all the kinds of people who usually hang out at the Chamber of Commerce over on one side of the room, and they're having one conversation. And then you have the software people, and they go on the other side of the room, and they're having this completely different conversation. And it really does seem that whenever cryptocurrency comes up, that there are actually two just totally different conversations that are happening about what is the point of all of this. And that overlay is actually where a lot of the interesting, both the complexity resides, but also where a lot, I think, of the potential upsides for having these conversations lie. So I'd love to give you a little bit of our perspective from Shopify, both, like representing many of the merchants around Canada and around the world and what they have for their commercial needs, but also really is the world of software, because that is what we're talking about here, is the world of software. So I would guess that to most of you here watching and attending, and to the other panelists, to you all, crypto is a conversation that is primarily about money, right? Is in the context of money and tax and the economy and the way that we regulate money, the way we think about money, which is all great. But to us, crypto is really more a conversation about computing, right? We're having a conversation about the way that software works and about how the way that we believe software might work in the future, the way that we consume, call it software resources and services, right? To us, crypto isn't really money. Crypto means code that can make commitments independently of whoever wrote it and whoever's computers are running it and things like that. And wherein there is obviously this large application that people are trying to get right around money and payments, which we can have all this conversation. But oftentimes when we're having this conversation, we're actually talking about the computing itself as something somebody might want to use and somebody might want to pay for and somebody might want to hire to get things done for them. So you posed this question at the beginning, which is, what will it take to see real adoption here beyond? And I think I would agree with most people here that speculation aside, the real adoption has not yet taken place. And we can ask, okay, what will cause this to take place? for merchants, like Shopify has a pretty good view into how much e-commerce is being transacted in cryptocurrency. This is information that we have, and it's more than zero, but like it's not a lot, right? This is not, I think, what a lot of the crypto proponents were hoping would happen by 2021. It is something, but primarily, like when merchants are accepting crypto and buyers are asking to pay for crypto, it is fairly localized to people who bet on this early and have bags they want to pay with, which is not the real use case I think we're mostly talking about. The real breakthrough will happen when merchants start having bills to pay that are denominated in cryptocurrency because they are consuming software that wants to be paid in its native currency. That is why merchants will start asking, please pay me in this because I have bills to pay that are denominated in this, right? Until that happens, merchants have a business to run. They have their livelihoods at stake. They are usually not going out of their way to say, could you please pay me in this new weird thing? That's usually not a thing that merchants do. But once this becomes more of a like, hey, like I'm a merchant, my store is powered by software. This software does something. It does a kind of computing where cryptocurrency is the native way that it is paid for. That, to us at least, is where we start seeing real value and real utility being produced beyond here's a fun speculative thing that people might like to pay for. The real breakthrough comes for when cryptocurrencies are doing real work, and that real work will take place in the software domain. So fundamentally, this is a software question. And this is why Shopify, who really lives, we are a software company and we are a software platform through which merchants hire other software to do work for them. That's what we do, right? So to whatever extent we can be helpful in helping people around Canada understand how that world works, this is really our role to play to help everybody understand and get this right. So thanks again for having me. I'll kick this over to everybody else to share your perspectives.
That's so helpful, Alex. Thank you. Matt, do you want to weigh in here a little bit from an investor perspective?
No, absolutely. And I echo Tim and Alex's comments. Just a big thank you to the Chamber for having this conversation. It's so timely. Kirsten, as you said at the start, like with everything going on. I want to take kind of parts of what Tim and Alex said, and I agree with them. And it's not to make this a boring panel, because I think we're going to have
a disagreement at some point.
We're absolutely going to have to disagree, but I like to think of it as two different tracks, right, of this conversation. You've got a track around blockchain and blockchain as an enabling technology for commerce. And there's a tremendous amount of applications there to remove friction from commerce, to provide efficiency. And I think you're already seeing a lot of use cases pop up in that area, right, where you can take out unnecessary intermediaries, right? You can provide trusted ecosystems and facilitate commerce overall. And I think there's a lot of exciting work happening there. And I almost want to decouple that a little bit from the separate track, which is cryptocurrencies, right? Which in today's iteration, and it may absolutely get to the point that Alex is describing, right, where it becomes more ubiquitous, right? And software starts to use that as a core currency. But in its current state, right, it really doesn't satisfy the mechanics that you would want for commerce, right? It is not a very effective mechanic for storing value, right? Because of the volatility. It's not a very effective mechanic for making payments either, because of it from an acceptance standpoint, it's not widely accepted, right? So if you decouple those two pieces, right, I think it's an important point to ground today's conversation. I think on the blockchain side, right, if I can focus on that piece, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, right, to use this to create shared trusted ecosystems. And I think from a policy standpoint, I think it's important, right, for our policymakers to be thinking about how can we apply this in new ways? How do we create a framework that allows innovators, right, to take advantage of this new technology, to address historical problems where we may have not had as much efficiency. So for instance, if a classic example, probably near and dear to any of us in the Toronto area, is buying a house where you have several parties that you need to create trust, right, in a complex ecosystem to resolve a problem, right, which is the transfer of a deed to a house, right, or land ownership, right? Some of those mechanics can be really, a lot of efficiency can be provided through blockchain technology, right, and facilitating information movement in relation to commerce. And I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and I think policymakers should be thinking actively around how do we create frameworks to enable that type of innovation, to allow these new technologies to come in to disrupt, right, provide value and efficiency for the Canadian economy. And I think providing policy clarity is really important, because policy clarity encourages people to make investments and bigger investments, right, which can push the needle on innovation and investment from a Canadian standpoint into that space. I think on the other side of the tracks, I think, you know, I think there's been a lot of progress made, right? I think if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, I think there was a view of, you know, banks versus technology companies, you know, and Bitcoin was a bit of a dirty word. And I think that's changed. And I think there's a greater appreciation now that cryptocurrencies, right, have a role to play as part of a larger portfolio strategy, right? And I think to Tim's point around central bank digital currencies and stable coins, I think we're going to see that trend pick up and accelerate over the years ahead. Ourselves on JP Morgan side, we launched our own coin, our own stable coin to just experiment. We have JP Morgan coin, which we're using really not necessarily as a cryptocurrency, but just really to learn about the space. And I think there's a lot of action there to learn, but I would categorize that for the time being more from a security side as an investment side, right? And I think that it's part of a larger portfolio strategy. So as people are investing into this space, they need to think about what their investment needs are, right? And crypto just being another asset that they can add to their portfolio to learn and to participate in, but just as another security class, like a commodity or a common equity stock. So I think as we go through this conversation, I think those are kind of the two tracks we need to keep in mind, and policymakers need to be very clear in their approach, right? Of not doing blanket policies that address both problems, but being very surgical, knowing that there's two different areas they need to cover.
Thank you for that. That was helpful. Greg, why don't we go to you next, because I know you have a view here in terms of how crypto and Bitcoin and so on can actually be an opportunity for broader participation from youth and others. So please, why don't you give us your perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And so I generally agree with comments from the rest of the panel here, but as you say, at Mogo, we're sort of focused on a different part, of cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency, by the way, we kind of think is a bit of a misnomer because there's a lot of things that fall under that. There are platforms like Ethereum. There are stores of value like Bitcoin, which really, given its volatility, is not a great actual currency. And then there's others like stablecoin, which are actually set up to be more of a currency. So there's a lot of different things that actually fall under the broader cryptocurrency umbrella. And I think from a regulatory perspective, I would also say that Canada does have a big opportunity here to be a leader. I mean, we are in a very emerging space globally right now, and it is global. And we're still very much in the first innings, as we're hearing from, Alex at Shopify, and how early days we are with merchants and payments in the crypto space. Our view is it is a certainty that we are moving into a digital world in currency as well, just like everything else, every other aspect of our life. And obviously COVID has been an accelerator to that in all aspects. And for the first time, we're seeing an acceleration in fintech adoption in Canada as well. And Canada does have an opportunity to be a leader in the crypto space today. As Tim mentioned, it's been a lot, the folks been more around investing and speculating. And so it's been more the purview of the regulators in Canada, like the Canadian securities regulators. And I think they are taking a leading role in terms of requiring crypto companies to be regulated and registered in Canada in a way that, is not even happening in the US yet. So I think in a lot of ways, Canada is leading the charge there. And I think regulation is actually good in certain forms because it'll encourage adoption. It'll bring more stability to the currencies because given they are so volatile right now, it's difficult to say they're a store of value versus speculation. Now, we are big believers that currencies like Bitcoin is a store of value and long-term ultimately will replace something like gold, especially when you think about the next generation. So to your point, the next generation, millennials and Gen Z, I would argue even more importantly, are growing up in a completely digital world. Anything that is not 24/7 is increasingly irrelevant to them. Even the equity markets is not 24/7. And it seems archaic to them that it's not 24/7. So the crypto world is 24/7. And I think we see the big opportunity in what we're focused on with Mogo in Canada is helping educate investors and consumers, and in particular the next generation, around financial literacy and financial health. I mean, there is a fundamental problem in Canada and the US for that matter, where consumers are ultimately spending more money than they have by using things like credit cards and leveraging up. and they're not investing. 48% of Canadians over 18 don't have a TSFA or an RSP account. So they're fundamentally not spending more money than they have, and they're not saving. So how do we get them engaged and educated? We think you've got to have something that is engaging and is going to get their attention. And we believe crypto actually is probably the single best product out there to engage the next generation around investing. So it may be speculation today, but if it gets the next generation to think of taking money away from spending, which, by the way, you spend money on a pair of shoes, that value effectively goes to zero. You put money in crypto, even if it goes down by 50%, the value of that crypto is still a lot more than, you know, the money you just spent on clothing. So, but importantly, it engages them. It gets them thinking about broader investing, and it gets them thinking about allocating some of their spend away from consumption into investing. And we're focused on taking that engagement around crypto and then educating them around other products like the power of long-term investing and compounding and diversification. And we see crypto as part of a diversified portfolio. You can have a segment of your investment in that, but without engagement, without a way to get the next generation excited and engaged, you're never going to get them focused on it and educated on it. And we think that's the big opportunity that we're focused on at Mogo.
That is amazing, and it's so encouraging to hear that you're focused on this segment. So thank you for that, and I can't wait to hear more about it. Shannon, this is not last but not least at all. You know, what we've been hearing from everybody is, you know, as people sort of move into this space, there's a lot of uncertainty. One thing that's always certain in Canada is taxes. Is tax policy keeping up with the evolution of this space? What can you tell us? What do people need to be aware of from your perspective? And potentially if things need to change, what would that look like?
Absolutely. And if I could, as everyone else has, I'd like to start out by thanking the Chamber and thanking all of you for having me today. It's a real pleasure to speak with you about this. You know, I think it's clearly a case here with cryptocurrency that we're dealing with a relatively new innovation, and quite frankly, the tax system has not kept pace. The Senate initiated a review of the issue of taxation of cryptocurrency in 2014 and recommended some actions to help Canadians understand what their obligations are and how to comply with them. And CRA has put out some material. There's a couple of guides available online, but generally speaking, in this space where there's so many players and so many different types of players and different types of activities that are going on, and given the speed of the evolution of this technology, there still are a lot of question marks about how to deal with taxes. And coupled with that, right now we're in a space where the Canada Revenue Agency is really ramping up its audit activity, its compliance activities, up to recently, as many of you will have heard, compelling CoinSquare to provide a list of some of its clients and you know, disclosure as to who is involved and who is making transactions involving cryptocurrency. So all in all, it's a very interesting time to be a tax practitioner. Lots of really interesting questions arising, but certainly a lot of frustrating uncertainty for people who are trying to get involved and become participants in the cryptocurrency environment.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for that. And, you know, you can imagine, especially with some of the millennials, if we can encourage them to get involved, the last thing they're probably thinking about is the tax implication, you know, 6 to 9 months later. And so this will be, this is going to be so important to get right. So we're going to hear more about that in a minute. So now we'll sort of go into a series of questions, and really encouraging people to get on Slido, and we're going to pull your questions forward shortly. So thanks for participating on that. But maybe Alex, what we'll do is we'll come back to you, and just, you know, you're at the forefront. You're talking to the merchants around the world, certainly across North America and around the world. You spoke about a little bit about you could see this becoming more mainstream when the merchants are being asked to pay their bills in cryptocurrency. But are there other sort of key use cases that you think are going to enhance adoption, or what are you hearing from the merchants about their plans, and what's Shopify doing to enable that?
So a lot of parts to your question. Trying to
Pick the
think
part you like.
how to best answer this for you. Again, I would come back to thinking of this question in terms of what it means to consume software and what it means for software to do work for you. If you go look today at, let's even just pick the two open cryptocurrency projects that I think people are probably most familiar with, Bitcoin and Ethereum. What are these things? They are basically computers, right? What you call them is they're basically, Bitcoin is a computer that can do only very, very simple kinds of math, like add things and subtract things and move something that essentially represents something that would resemble in our world, like this little bearer instrument that you have, which literally is like, I own this little string of numbers that suggests that I can sign something that suggests that I have the ability to send this coin over to Shannon. Right. So this is what you were basically talking about, this computer that is out there in the world that people can use and that everybody can go agree that it has a certain, what we call a state, which essentially you can translate forward into like who owns what, more or less. And this is this little project. It started as this little project that has since grown into this very big and speculative project that says like, hey, this is this shared resource that anyone can use. Anyone is able to tap into it to get things done. But in the case of Bitcoin, it was initially very, very restrictive, right? The whole idea of the design of this thing was to make it digital gold-like, quote unquote, pick your favorite metaphor, so that it could only do very, very few things. It was designed to be clunky and slow and hard to change on purpose. Now, if you fast forward a little bit, you can contrast this with an ecosystem like Ethereum, which is now starting to support real world projects that non-software people have actually heard of. So if you think about things like NFTs, right, these fun new kind of collectible things that people are starting to get engaged with, these are fundamentally applications of a new version of this, distributed computer people have made around its, you would say that this is now, we have this project that is generally programmable and generally composable, and people can ask to do work for them. Now, it costs some sort of resources to run this. It costs computing cycles, it costs coordination. And because of that, there's this little token that people, that has been created called ETH, or every cryptocurrency has its own version of this, which you have to pay this computer to get things done for you. I have a point to your original question, I promise. But I'm just trying to frame this in terms of like, when we talk about cryptocurrencies in the real strict sense of how software people think about what they are, they're essentially redeemable for work done. Not just any kind of work, for software work done. Now, where might you want to do this kind of work? It's a good question. So earlier, Matt suggested to say like, hey, there are lots of kinds of transactions out in the world where it's hard to coordinate trust. And you might want to say like, look, could you have a distributed system where you don't have to trust any particular party, but where we could leverage, blockchain technology to get things like this done? And you use the example of a house. I actually have a hard time imagining something like a home buying purchase being a good fit for this, even in the medium term, for a couple of reasons. And I'll contrast this for what I would call good reasons why. I'll tell you why. If you have a public blockchain with like Bitcoin or Ethereum or something on it, and you have a whole bunch of native coins on it that represent who owns what. The thing with these open source projects is that anybody can make their own copies of them, right? Anybody can try their own version. Anybody can upgrade them. Anybody can do whatever. The reason why you care about it is because you care about the one where everybody is, right? We care about Bitcoin because that's where everybody else is, and not some copy of Bitcoin that I made the other day. No one cares, right? That's Alex Danko's project. No one cares, right? Like, but what happens if I put my house on one of these things and then someone forks this blockchain tomorrow? Does my house exist in two places now? Do I have to even think about the 1% probability that somebody might take that seriously? That's very stressful, right? That's hard to think about. Generally, this problem of taking real world problems and real world assets and saying like, we would like to solve some of the trust problems around these things tend to be fairly difficult to implement in a way that's useful. As opposed to, for instance, you talk about things like, oh, how do you coordinate title transfer and things like that? This is very complicated. It's like, look, if you've ever bought and sold stocks, right? You know how many steps are involved in buying a stock? a lot of steps. We've made them very, very, very simple through your broker. If you go on RBC or if you go on Wealthsimple or something like that, like we figured out how to coordinate all this trust very, very well without the need of a blockchain, because fundamentally these are real world assets that have real world laws around them that are not these digitally native things. In contrast, let's look at something like an NFT, for instance, right? These interesting digitally native, there aren't even rights to things. They're really just pointers at significance that entitles, I am the person who has this particular bragging right. It was created on the internet. It only exists virtually. This is something that we'd like to exchange around us. That's the type of thing that exists natively on the internet, right? There is no real world thing. There is only something that exists within this context of a cryptocurrency world. In those situations, it actually makes a ton of sense for the computer to have this, you can call Ethereum the computer here that is doing the work, to ask, say, like, if you want to consume this, you need to pay me in how I consume resources, right? You need to pay me in actual cryptocurrency, right? And so when merchants come to us and they say, like, hey, Shopify, like, what I want to get these kinds of things. I want to experiment with this world. I want to experiment with crypto. Really, there are two fundamentally different kinds of questions they are asking. Some of them is they're asking, like, buyers are coming to me saying, I want to pay you with this stuff. Can you help me accept it, but then just get rid of it as quickly as possible and give me dollars? Mm-hmm. We've actually let merchants do this for some time now. I think for 4 or 5 years now, Shopify has let merchants install third-party offsite payment gateways like BitPay or Coinbase Commerce or any of those things that allow them to accept cryptocurrency, settle in cash, and then get on their way doing stuff. But the other kind of question, what we are getting asked a lot more now, that is more new and more recent and more of a real question, is help me do new kinds of things, right? It's this merchants coming to us and asking, I would like to use this particular kind of app. I would like to do this new kind of digital commerce. I would like to start experimenting with tokens that live in video games virtually. I would like to start experimenting with these interesting new kinds of digital status and fashion. That's always where these things start, right? Is in video games and fashion and those interesting kinds of worlds that we don't take seriously until at some point they just win. That's where these new kinds of merchant requests are coming from, is them asking us, help me do this new thing. I don't totally understand it, but I know that this is a part of what I'm trying to express. And that really is our job at Shopify, is trying to help them and really help ourselves understand, okay, what is really going on here? Like, what are you actually trying to do? How can we make sure that we give you software and advice that will not put you in tax jail? How do we make sure that you are not accidentally selling securities on our platform? We can't have that happen, obviously. We need to make sure that never happens in a way that we're aware of. But if there's new things that you want to do here that in the intention of what they're trying to do are good and real and reasonable, then that's what we are always trying to learn about every day, is thinking, like, are we helping you consume computing in a new way that helps you express the kind of commerce you want to express? That's how I would summarize as, like, this new sort of query we're getting from merchants.
So it's not to solve an old problem with a new way, but it's to solve
a new problem
and,
with
and
the only.
Yeah.
You just summarized it so much better than I could, right? This is not really trying to solve old problems with new technology. This is trying to solve new kinds of problems that did not even exist before, with solutions that don't yet exist, but we are figuring out.
Yeah. Okay.
Krista, if I can just
please
answer it. So I don't disagree, Alex. I think, you know, your point around, you know, there's value in solving new problems, I think is well taken. I think at its core, though, I think one of the problems with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is oftentimes it is a solution looking for a problem, right? And it is hunting for that.
Sure.
And I think that
absolutely
there is a tremendous amount of, both on new problems and old problems, applications for, again, if I can decouple, you know, cryptocurrencies and Greg, I thought your point was excellent, that that's an umbrella term and there's a lot of complexity under there, and using that as a blanket term is probably helpful. But if I can use kind of the mainstream definition of that, which is kind of the Bitcoin and the Dogecoin and all of that view, which has gotten a lot of publicity recently. And if I can decouple that from blockchain itself, I think blockchain has a tremendous amount of opportunity for applications, right, in a lot of the spaces. And I think there is a tremendous amount of utility in some of the legacy problems where there's need for trust, where we've found ways to work through it with a tremendous amount of friction and third parties, right, each taking their cost along the chain as they go along. and that's inefficient for the economy, right? And streamlining that actually provides a lot of value by taking out middlemen from that equation. I think there's a lot of value there. And then I think over time, you're going to find a lot of new opportunities to apply the technology, right? That'll be extremely powerful and extremely potent. And I think that's kind of, I think, the more important stream in my mind, right? That we need to be focused on when we're having that conversation.
So I guess it's a good thing that we both think different things are important, because we can both focus on where we need to be.
Yeah, that's great. This is good. Very, very helpful. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I think, you know, to your point, Matt, and Alex, you gave the comment on, you know, we've already figured out things like stock, buying and selling stock, and there's trust there. We have, however, that system is still very inefficient, right? There's very long delays. I mean, we're a public company. We are constantly dealing with shareholders who are trying to transfer stock from one account to the other, and it's very cumbersome, very difficult. You got to coordinate with a lot of people. You got to get on the phone with people. It's still a legacy settlement network still. That there's a ton of efficiencies, I think, to be gained by moving that onto a blockchain type platform. And so I think it's less about the trust issue and more just that it's inefficient. It takes way too long. Yeah. And in a digital world, that doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, that's great. That's very helpful. I know, for example, we've been involved with putting blood on the blockchain, right? So taking a legacy issue where it's really hard to understand, to be able to track it, to know, making sure that you absolutely know where every bag is and fractionally where it came from and so on. So that's a problem that's been around for a long time, that the blockchain was very, very helpful for, right? So whether it's oysters in France or champagne or blood or other areas like that. So that's very helpful, because I think we're now starting to separate in our minds kind of the two sides to this, this challenge.
And first, to that point, I think applying it to a problem where there's known value, either for society or for the stakeholders, is important, right? Because there's a cost to it, not just a financial cost, right? But like, it is not, like, to be straight, like, depending on how it's applied, it is not the most environmentally beneficial technology, right? It has a cost, carbon footprint wise, computing power wise, focus wise, energy wise. And I think, it's important with all these things, right, that we don't just kind of look to apply it wherever, but we apply it in areas that provide value.
Yeah. And I don't want to lose that thought, right? Because sometimes we think that things that exist in a virtual world are sort of free from an environmental footprint perspective. But in fact, this is a very energy intensive application. And maybe I'll throw this over a little bit to Tim, but I'd appreciate others kind of jumping in. So as the Bank of Canada starts to think about creation of digital currencies, would love to hear a little bit about kind of where you are in that thought process, how you're balancing off, given your unique position, right? Some of these environmental and energy concerns. And just maybe for what you can share, obviously, kind of where you're at in that process, and how the regulators need to be thinking about this very important. On the one hand, Canada has got massive commitments from an environmental perspective, and on the other hand, we've got this brand new way of burning up energy. So over to you.
Yeah, well, actually, maybe to start off, I wouldn't really connect our work on central bank digital currency with the sort of energy issue.
We'll separate them then.
There's no presumption that even that we would be that a central bank digital currency would be using blockchain technology. I mean, that's one of a variety of different technological methods that could be used, and certainly. Certainly, we've seen with cryptocurrencies where the use of the blockchain is basically, as I guess Matt stressed, was really to deal with a situation where there's you're not relying on any third party to
Right.
Establish trust. But with a central bank digital currency, if you don't trust the central bank, then we're out of that game. But I think the presumption is, well, people use our banknotes all the time. They use bank deposits that are that banks, where banks are using our reserves to settle their accounts among them. So, I mean, clearly there's a high degree of public trust in what we're offering. And so when we think about a central bank digital currency, I mean, that trust is an important thing we're bringing to the table. And that, of course, means that we wouldn't have to rely on those environmentally very wasteful methods of mining technologies that we've seen with cryptocurrencies. And that is certainly a major advantage of a CBDC relative to any of those crypto products. In terms of where we are with the project, as I sort of mentioned, it's something we've been looking at a variety of policy issues, kind of thinking about the public policy implications of having a digital form of cash. And we've sort of pulled that together into some preliminary conclusions, which are that, I mean, we don't currently see a strong case for issuing it, but the world is progressing very rapidly, and probably even more so in the wake of the pandemic. And certainly, a couple of things that we've been keeping an eye on. One of them is declining use of cash or use of banknotes in Canada. I mean, to a certain extent, that's something that naturally would happen because there are a lot more digital means of payments offered by the banks, debit cards, credit cards, and so on. And those are becoming more popular at the expense of paying with banknotes. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the public is making different choices. But where it could start to become a problem is if you actually hit a tipping point where people who are reliant on cash because they don't have good bank accounts, they live in remote areas, that sort of thing, very poor people, the homeless, and so on, that those people could be completely frozen out of the economy if their only available means of payment becomes no longer widely accepted. So in that case, you sort of think about, well, should we be offering a digital form, like something that would look and feel like more like a prepaid card that people who don't have access to the full range of banking services and maybe don't even have smartphones could use. So that's one sort of line of thinking. Another line of thinking is about this broader space we've been talking about, in the sense that you have a whole lot of different innovations in the payment space, and including these stable coins, and including some large prospect of large tech companies launching their own stable coins, and the possibility that those could actually start to have a major footprint in the Canadian market. And at that point, the question that has to be asked is, well, if you're going to have some kind of digital form of cash like that, should it be created by a public sector entity or by a private sector entity like a big tech company? And certainly you can argue, I mean, there are some arguments on both sides. I mean, clearly the private sector has been driving a lot of the innovation in this area. On the other hand, there are issues of privacy, data, data protection, and the whole business model of big tech companies, which is to amass more data and mine it for in order to develop more products and services and further concentrate their own power on their own platforms. And so there's a sense that you could end up with a situation where increasingly you'd have one or perhaps a small number of big tech companies encompassing the entire economy and the entire payment system. In that case, there might be some benefit of a public entity coming in and basically offering a product that would be run for basically in the public interest rather than for the profit of a particular company. Now, obviously, if we were to do that, we'd have to figure out some way of partnering with the private sector, and because obviously it would have to fit into the rest of the economy and the payment system somehow. And also a lot of the innovation we'd need to drive it would probably come from come from the private sector as well. So that's certainly one set of issues where we have to think about, where we've been thinking about a lot, and we've had various sort of proofs of concept kind of experiments and so on, partnering with the private sector, but we're going to have to do a whole lot more of that before we settle on a model. I mean, another thing is this whole nexus of privacy and on the other hand, financial abuses and crimes. You know, you've obviously seen, I mean, cash is used for things like, you know, for things like money laundering, terrorist financing, collecting ransoms. Cryptocurrencies are even better for that purpose because they can be scaled up much larger. You don't need a big suitcase to take them across borders and so on. So I mean, the concern, of course, is if we were to create a public digital currency, it would have to have some safeguards against a lot of those kinds of abuses. So it couldn't be fully anonymous. On the other hand, it would also have to be private enough that people would trust that their data was not going to be kind of just feed into big government in some sense. So the technology actually does offer some opportunities there for something that would be more like, you know, something that would be ordinarily private, but which under defined conditions, you know, the way the police can come and search your freezer if they suspect a crime is the criminal, you know, earnings of crime are being stored in or being kept in banknotes in your freezer. There should be some process whereby law enforcement would have access to a digital currency, but not just because they feel like it, because they can actually convince a judge that there is probable cause to think that they need to have that access. So we certainly need to work further on the combination of sort of technology and governance that would go into that sort of appropriate mix of privacy and would have the degree of trust that the public would need to have before they'd actually want to use a central bank digital currency. So that's just one example of the kinds of issues that we're having to think about a whole lot more. And you know, a lot of very interesting and exciting work to do.
Well, it's so interesting, and it's such a frontier where we can have multiple, like inside of a country, multiple different currencies all operating in parallel, you know, needing some kind of governance around them. But, you know, people don't know when I trade banknotes or, you know, buy my, pay the guy that cuts my lawn in cash or what have you. And it's just, as you start to think about making it more and more part of how the economy operates, as you're pointed out here, there's so many nuances that need to be thought through, and it's exciting work, right?
Yes. Can I just on the environmental topic? I think we first of all we absolutely agree that, you know, Bitcoin in particular consumes a lot of energy, and there's no denying it. And I think the Bitcoin community is focused on moving more and more to clean energy, right? So some people just suggest that by definition, all energy use is in kind of fossil fuel for Bitcoin, and that's actually not true. More and more of it is clean energy. Mm-hmm. You know, the other thing that I would say that sometimes people kind of, I don't think make a reasonable analogy, which is, if you want to just focus on the energy consumption without the value of something, you can do that. You could say, hey, you know, the internet or gaming consumes more energy than a country. So what are we gonna do? Shut down all gaming? No, it consumes a lot of energy. But, you know, people are making the decision that actually the value that of gaming to society is worth the energy consumption, right? And so to me, part of the question is do you believe there's value from some of this the consumption as well? One of the things that we're doing at Mogo that is unique, I think it's unique anywhere right now in the world, is we have our prepaid Visa card, which, you know, is all about helping consumers use and control their own money and their own spend. We have a Bitcoin cash back on the card. So we're allowing Canadians who actually earn Bitcoin as their cash back rather than air miles. So where they're actually can actually start participating in crypto without spending any of their own money. Number one. Number two, we have an automatic carbon offset on our all spend on the card as well. So that automatically, for every dollar of spend, there's a pound of carbon offset, and we effectively are buying carbon offsets with the interchange revenue to do that. Now, it doesn't solve the problem, but there are ways that you can, get people more aware of the problem and try to, help with both on helping consumers get exposure to this asset class and think about investing, while at the same time think about ways to help the environment as well.
Yeah, like other industries have had to adapt, right? Like the travel industry and other energy sector. It is there are creative solutions, and I'm sure some of Matt's team is looking at what investment opportunities are there in some of the clean energy that would support these server farms and what have you. So it could be a bit of a virtual loop here as we quickly see that there's opportunities as well as, and I think you make a great point about value. So thank you for bringing that up. Tim, I can see that you're wanting to jump in here.
Which is, it's really the fact that, that for Bitcoin, the consumption of the energy is kind of an integral part of the process. It's basically that having something that's costly to mine is a substitute for trust. And if you can get trust, people, to the extent people trust the Canadian dollar, it's because we've kept inflation at 2% a year on average for the last 25 years, and they don't see a reason to think that that's going to end. But obviously, for Bitcoin, you have to trust that people aren't going to create unlimited numbers of Bitcoins. You need to make it costly to mine them, and that's kind of an integral part of the whole incentive design of that. Now, you can substitute clean energy for the dirty energy, but of course, clean energy also has other uses. And so if you use an extra gigawatt of clean energy to mine Bitcoins, that's a gigawatt less that's being used for some useful purpose, like watching this webcast, for example. So that's the...
I'm not sure where the greater value would be, but we'll debate that later. No, it's a good point. Listen, I want to make sure that both that Shannon gets a word here, and I know we've got a bunch of questions that the audience is generating. So Shannon, one of the things that I think is mystifying for a lot of people is the tax treatment, sort of long-term, short-term, the timing of when tax is tax obligation is generated. Could you just give us a little bit of a primer, or sort of a synopsis of where the incentives and disincentives are there, and advice to business, but also if you've got advice to the government around what should change, this would be your moment.
Well, thanks so much. Sure, at a very high level, the way that CRA is treating cryptocurrency for purposes of income tax is generally they're taking the view that cryptocurrency is a commodity. It's an asset that works as a medium of exchange between parties who agree to use it. And so the way that this is actually going to play out in terms of tax depends on what you're doing with your crypto activities. So for example, it could be other transactions involving cryptocurrency can generate business income if you're carrying on business activity, or it can be a capital gain depending on what you're doing. So, for example, if you are in the business of cryptocurrency trading, you're actively carrying on business. It is the business of your company. That's what you're doing every day. You've got a very business-like model and a plan. You're conducting hundreds and thousands of transactions daily. You're probably carrying on a business. At that point, you're going to have likely an income treatment of your cryptocurrency. On the other hand, if you're a casual investor and you're curious about it and you decide to buy some Bitcoin and hold on to it until an opportune moment, you would probably be receiving capital gain treatment and taxed accordingly. Where there are problems, though, and where there are challenges and sticking points for people is they're kind of in three areas. So the first is, what is your activity? And certain other crypto activities are not quite as defined in their tax treatment. So for example, mining and staking, that's a bit of an area where we don't have as much information from CRA. So CRA acknowledges these activities, understands that they're happening, and says that the tax treatment will vary depending on whether you're carrying on business activities or whether you're doing it in a hobby fashion. But the so what is missing. So I guess from my perspective and from a tax practitioner's perspective, when we have people coming to us, they've been carrying on activities without really knowing how to treat it for tax purposes. And there's a huge amount of information and guidance that's missing. And where that can be a problem is there's, valuation and timing, and when is an inclusion in income made? At what point do you take this value? At what point have you generated your income? So those are some of the major pain points. And really what's going to be needed is for CRA to take a good look at it and put out some guidance and hopefully catch up.
Okay, that's great. That is great advice. Thank you. And it's important, right? Like this, people cannot treat this as an afterthought. So thank you for what you're doing. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that are being generated on Slido here. And what's kind of fun about Slido is people are voting on the questions. So the questions that have the most interest are kind of rising to the top. So we're going to work, and I'm going to pitch this first question towards, I think, Matt and Greg. So I'll just give you ample warning there. And so the question was from Tom, and it says, do cryptocurrencies draw investment away from productive areas of the economy that fuel growth and job creation? So this is interesting. And I'm wondering if you've got any perspective on that, or if any other of our panelists do. So I'll let you jump in there.
Maybe just to start, Chris, I don't necessarily agree that it draws investment away from productive parts of society. I think, like anything, it's a new asset class, right? It has its own characteristics versus other asset class, and it can be used, to provide certain elements of risk to a portfolio as a security, right? Has certain characteristics and behavior. I do think that it is quite volatile at the moment, right? And I think, people need to go in eyes wide open and have a diversified portfolio. We launched a cryptocurrency basket product recently to kind of help diversify some of that volatility, right? So that it's more of a basket view, so that you're less exposed to an individual cryptocurrencies movement. But I think in the same way as people who invest in gold, right? And gold is not necessarily in most cases being used as a productive asset. It's being used as a hedge against inflation, or as to provide certain types of exposure to a portfolio. In that same capacity, just like other commodities or other types of vehicles, right? Cryptocurrency can be used to add certain attributes to somebody's portfolio. But I do want to stress that it is one asset right? And people need to look at their portfolios and their own situations as to how much they expose themselves to, right? Because there is a lot of volatility at the moment in that asset class, right? So people need to go eyes wide open around that risk.
Excellent. Thank you.
So,
Greg, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that to Matt's point, I mean, it's a new technology, it's a new area. I mean, my view is we're moving into a fully digital world in all aspects of our lives, and so the broader cryptocurrency category, which as we described has a lot of different components, is absolutely going to be a core part of the digital world going forward. In terms of what currencies and what form, obviously that's still yet to be determined. But I would say that investment in the broader technology platforms around cryptocurrency that can bring efficiencies to legacy transactions and take those inefficiencies out, remove cost, lower cost for consumers, benefits consumers. And by the way, this is an industry where, billions are flowing in. There's a lot of jobs being created in this space for people all over the world. There's a lot of development resources going into this area. So I think it's actually in a lot of ways the opposite. And ultimately, I think it's going to drive innovation. It's going to drive jobs. It's going to lower costs for consumers, regardless of what specific currency's price is and whether or not Bitcoin is going to be worth a few $100,000 or not.
This is great. So there's another question that kind of drills down into this a little bit more, and so we might start with Tim on this one. And question is from Mercia, and it's, why is the environmental cost talked about when we're talking about blockchain, but never about the fiat system that's currently in place? Do you have any hard data on this? I mean, we think, don't know if you have hard data, but maybe you have a perspective.
Actually, we do talk about the environmental impact of the fiat system, and that was one of our one of the innovations we made a few years ago when we switched banknotes to polymer from paper. They last 3 or 4 times as long, and they're basically cheaper and greener than the old paper money. And obviously there's a cost to that, but we think, as long as Canadians, I mean, the environmental cost of a $20 bill is a very tiny fraction of $20, and that's the nature of a fiat money, that that its value is not based on the resources expended to produce it. It's based on the public's trust that its purchasing power is going to be maintained. And so the environmental cost of the fiat system is not zero, but it's much lower than the cost of a system that is costly by design. And this is where, where fiat money, a century or so ago replaced gold and silver money. That was also a big savings in environmental costs. It was, basically because you had to mine the gold and the silver, and all the money you had was based on that. But then when they moved to banks and paper money, then that meant that you didn't need to mine all that money. You basically could issue a form of paper token that was equivalent in value, and that's I think that going back to a system where you have to mine all your money to maintain people's trust in it seems like it is a step backwards in terms of the environmental impact.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. That's I think we need to kind of take that balanced view and realize that really nothing is without some costs. We need inputs for everything, right? And so how do we best we do the best with what we can, right? And that we're conscious of where alternatives, smart alternatives exist. One of the questions that's kind of woven through the thread here is really around anonymity. And a few of you have mentioned this a little bit in your remarks, but the question is, cash today, as we've talked about, all you need is a big briefcase, is fully private. Why would cryptocurrency be treated any differently? So I'll throw that out for whoever would like to raise their hand and has a perspective on this.
First of all, I can kick things off. I'm sure everybody has, perspectives on this. Cash has unique characteristics, right? It's the only form of immediate payment we have today, unfortunately, right? And it's very convenient. I don't need, if I'm buying a car from Tim, right, and for $1,000, right? It's a great deal, Tim. Thanks. Like I can show up with physical currency, and the moment I exchange hands with him, right, it's final. It's final. It's irrevocable, right? I don't have to have his account information. I don't have to have any of that. And those are unique characteristics. Unfortunately, those characteristics, right, have not been replicated in the digital economy yet. And I think what's happening with blockchain gives the opportunity to create some of those elements to replace it. I think that's what's happening with, a lot of things that the Bank of Canada is driving in Canada has the opportunity to enhance it. But I do think there's also, because of those characteristics of cash, there's an opportunity for bad actors to play, right? It's not traceable. It is immediate. There's a lot of those elements to it that, lend themselves to, not positive aspects of our society, right? And there's an opportunity to say, as we move and we start using things like blockchain, like cryptocurrencies, like new technologies, right? To not just make a faster horse, right? Yeah. And say, this is the characteristics of this cash, let's just drop them into the digital economy, but to rethink it and say, how do we make this better, right? And I think that's where I would land on that conversation, is to not just replicate cash's characteristics with cryptocurrency, but look for opportunities right, to kind of enhance it, to keep the best value benefits of cash, which is that immediacy and the fact you don't need all these details around things, but also to carve off some of the gaps we've had in the past.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd love to chime in here just to underscore that answer actually a tiny bit. So Matt, you mentioned like that cash is immediate, it's final, it's so good, and all those reasons. The reason why cash is immediate and final and works so well is because, as Tim has said a couple of times, there is so much trust in the government, and specifically because there is so much trust that you will be able to redeem that cash if you so choose against your future debts to the government in your taxes or wherever it is. Right? Like that's the reason why cash has value, is that you're simply, it's not terribly different actually from swapping a check that you've signed over saying, instead of you owing me this money, now you owe me this money, right? It's like it's all from the government. But what gives it this value is the fact that fundamentally, you know, you will have to redeem it at some point in your life, and you have this thing you can cash in. Now, when you apply this to crypto and you ask again, like, where is that fundamental value going to come from that people want to cash in? Again, I would suggest that there are two fundamental places that it could come from that are really come from opposite ends of the spectrum. The first person you might need to pay is Tim, right? Not Tim, but the CRA, right? You might have to say like, hey, I know I will need to pay the CRA. I will need something that I can pay the CRA with, and I need something that ultimately maps back. Or you might say, well, as you said, this is a software world. I know I will have software debts coming up that I'll have to pay. And if I feel that by accumulating, if I'm using, Ethereum to do work for me, then I might want to accumulate some of that stuff simply because I know that at some point I will have an IOU denominated in it. Those are the reasons why we might exchange these things, and meaningful believe if I send you some ETH and it clears in, like 6 blocks or whatever it might be, let's say that's 25 minutes or something, that's pretty close to instant settlement. It's better than T+1, T+2, right? Then we can say like, yes, the reason why it clears so quickly is because we both agree we will have future debts denominated in that currency. That is fundamentally where this trust comes from, right? So again, I guess I would go as far as to say like everything that Tim has said around fundamentally, this is about trust and how are we spending what we have and putting what we have on the line in order to create trust that people can share around. That is exactly it. That is what we're talking about here. Software companies have one kind of trust. The bank has another kind of trust. It's all trust.
But by the way, cash isn't totally anonymous either, right? If you deposit $10,000 cash in the bank actually is going to take your information, right, and submit it to the government, right? So it's within a certain band, it is.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. It's true. So it'll be interesting when the CRA accepts cryptocurrency and to pay our taxes. We'll know that we're finally come full circle, right? No, it's a good point. Let me just go back here. Some of these questions I think we've sort of answered. So this one is a little bit interesting, and I'm going to maybe ask Alex to kick it off and then others can chime in. And it's from Wayne. Is crypto needed less for online commerce in a country like Canada, where we've got a concentrated financial system that has pretty efficient debit cards, P2P payments, interact transfers, and so on? And this really kind of goes to some of the remarks that you made at the very beginning, is when we've got all of these alternate ways to pay, what's the killer business case for cryptocurrency? So so for online commerce, I will let you take the first crack at that question, if you would.
Yeah, Wayne, that's a great question. That is the question, right? Like, in what way is this not a little bit plausibly better, but massively better than what we have today with Interac, with Visa, with all of these payment rails? Again, like, you look at the cost of Visa today, which merchants likes to complain about, oh, I don't want to pay 200 whatever basis points to get this transaction done when I could be paying much less than that in Asia or somewhere like that. Other countries have this figured out, like the take rates on these kinds of transactions are lower. But it's like, look, all of this, relatively speaking, is very low compared to the friction of introducing very, very new, radically different things, right? It's very hard for a merchant to ask a buyer, would you mind trying this new thing out because it's interesting? Again, I would suggest that the real breakthrough for cryptocurrencies being used as an actually superior exchange of value for commercial transactions will not so much come between buyers and merchants, but will come through merchants and vendors whose cost of goods sold is denominated in this stuff. That's my opinion. You can take that with whatever grain of salt you like, but that's kind of how I'm coming from this stuff. Over to whoever else wants to take a stab at this.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that one? All right. Let me just take, oh, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, just actually, building on Alex's point, I think this is, I think this is a really important thing to keep in mind, is just how much inertia there is in what people use to pay for things. Because, I mean, obviously there are some reasons, to some extent people accept cash because they can use it to pay the government, but it's also they can use it to pay everybody else. And everybody is accepting it because they know that everybody else is accepting it. And so really to start to come into mainstream use, it's kind of getting to some tipping point where enough other people are accepting it that that once you accept it, you can actually find somebody else who will want to receive it. So it's kind of that, well, I mean, economists call this a network effect, the fact that one person's case for using it is very much dependent on everybody else's, and sort of how you get through that to launch a genuinely different thing, I think, is the key challenge.
Thank you. I think we're just about at time here. I'll just kind of look at our panel and see if anybody wanted to add any other last thoughts that you think didn't get covered today, or that you'd like to make sure that the audience hears from you. Shannon, go ahead.
Thanks. I wanted to chime in just again on the issue of cash, the question relating to cash and why crypto should be treated differently. I just want to highlight that just because someone is transacting in cash doesn't make them not taxable. So I guess the message I would leave our audience members with today is that your record keeping and your tracking of what you're doing in the crypto space is really important, because at some point, the chances are that CRA may decide to audit. And it's really important to know that you have the ability to explain what your activities are and present to the CRA and to the revenue authorities what it is that you're doing, so that your obligations are met. The really unfortunate part is that we don't have the full information as to what your obligations may be, but just a word of caution that you're keeping track and paying attention.
Yeah, they're going to catch up quickly, right? Like we're seeing other countries. One of the audience members noted that the IRS is starting to ask a lot of questions, and so we know it's coming. So that's very, very sound advice for everybody. Keep your records straight. Okay, well, listen, thank you, amazing panel. I'm gonna hand things over to Patrick here to wrap up, but just on a personal note, it's been incredible listening to you and learning from you, and audience, you've been fantastic. Thank you for all those great questions. Hopefully we got through quite a few of them, and that you found it informative. So thank you so much, and over to you, Patrick.
Thanks, Kirsten. This has been a really fascinating discussion on an issue that obviously is not going away. We covered off a lot of territory, and the biggest takeaway for me is that at the end of the day, this is a new method of communicating commitments to different communities. And I will look at Canadian Tire money, the one that I have in my kitchen drawers, differently when I go to redeem that, hopefully through that Canadian Tire community that I get us a part of. Anyway, again, thanks to the audience for your active participation, the panelists for your deep expertise. This will be shared with everyone who participated on the panel and up on chamber.ca. And again, I thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedules to invest with us today. Have a good one, and we look forward to engaging with you again soon. Bye.
Thank you so much.